Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Josh.
And I'm Sarah.
And we are the Hiking Fools, guiding you through the trails of Glacier National Park. And in this episode, we have a special guest joining us, talking about traveling through the trails of Glacier. Something you really need to consider is avalanches and the snow and ice that forms and affects the landscape and affects our experiences in Glacier. So, Eric, we're so happy to have you. We've talked, for at length about some great resources, avalanches, kind of your background, and we want to continue the conversation, talking about specific places in Glacier. Some place in the west entrance that it's namesake, right? Avalanche Lake, and a lot of people visit there. So many people hike it. So many people see it. There's some great features along that trail, and Sarah and I have been there. We've heard the avalanches occurring. That's crazy. You wonder what that is. It sounds like thunder, but that trail has some interesting features. And then just further on the Going to the Sun Road, there's also some avalanche evidence, if you want to discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So starting with the Avalanche Trail, it's called that for a reason, right? And even as you're hiking up before you even get to the lake, you'll see evidence of big avalanches that have come off of Mount Cannon. On the as you're hiking up on your left side, on the north side there, and I think I'm recalling correctly, in 2014, we had a large, widespread avalanche cycle throughout the region, and a little background is that there was actually a weak layer in the snowpack that formed above a crust all the way back in December, and then in March. We had a huge storm, rather warm storm, freezing levels, snow levels were around 5,000, 5,500 feet, but lots of snow. So we had a huge cycle again throughout the region, and the avalanche off of Cannon came down all the way from, it started way up high, 8,000 plus feet, and came down all the way to the valley bottom there, crossed the trail and went up the other side of the valley. And so that's just an indication of how destructive that these really big avalanches can be, and it took out tons of trees. And the trail crew that summer had a huge, a huge lift, a hard time. There was lots of downed trees on trails throughout the park after that cycle, because those big avalanches just, again, took out a bunch of trees, deposited them on trails, and it was this tangled mess of pickup sticks. And so, that's one indication. If you're hiking up the Avalanche Trail, you can see evidence and sort of the powerful nature of these big avalanches. And like you mentioned, when you get to the lake, you're safe at the lake looking at, if it's summer, you're looking out and you can sort of see all these avalanche pads coming down to the lake. And like you mentioned before, that you have, you can hear them across that amphitheater there, and you'll hear avalanches sort of cascading down the steep cliffs, near the lake there. And so, yeah, along that trail, it's a great example of, what avalanches can do to the landscape, like we mentioned before, just completely revamp the vegetation and the forest structure and the things that are there, and modify the habitat. And as you travel up the Sun Road from Avalanche, up towards Logan Pass, you'll see a lot of avalanche paths. The entire road, from basically Avalanche Campground all the way over to St. Mary, there's 40 plus avalanche paths.
Wow.
That impact the road. And so as you're going up the road from Avalanche, again, Mount Cannon, this time it's sort of the north-facing paths. And again, in 2014, another big avalanche came off of the other side, crossed the road, deposited a bunch of snowy debris and woody debris on the road. And, as you're driving along the road, if you've driven it prior to 2014, you would have looked to your right if you're driving up the road, and you would have seen a forest. And then after that, and now you sort of see this open terrain with a bunch of, down trees. And that was actually one of the paths that we collected data in for one of our studies, looking at, we used tree rings to basically recreate a timeline of avalanches in the past, because we have decent observations from people that go back a certain amount of time, but basically, we don't have observations that go back really, really far. So it's hard for us to kind of look at, well, how often does this happen? So the nice thing is that we can use trees to kind of fill in the gaps. And, what can happen is an avalanche hits a tree. It can do a number of things. It can uproot it and move it down slope, or it can also hit the tree and it can cause mechanical damage to the tree, meaning like it impacts the outside of the tree, but that actually, it sort of manifests on the inside of the tree in the tree ring itself from that year. So it could leave what we call a scar. So it basically looks like a little, a tiny little mark on the ring from that year where the avalanche hit the tree. So then anyways, we get a bunch of those, from old dead and down trees, and we kind of count the rings, look at where those scars or those marks are, and we can kind of cross date them from non-disturbed trees outside the avalanche path, and that gives us an idea of when those years occurred. And if we have enough of those, then we can reliably create a long-term record of avalanches. So the trees tell a story, in their tree rings, not just of their own growth patterns, but whether they were disturbed by avalanches or not. And so, anyways, that was a way for us to help extend our record even further back.
So in the summer months, you're not just, I'm on vacation. You hang up your ice axe, so to speak, and break out the chainsaw. But avalanches are important for predators in the park, too, because that's one of the first places that, bears go to after they come out of their den, hibernating all winter, Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, another great question. Another one of those sort of, side impacts of avalanches, more sort of ecologically related, where avalanches, of course, as we mentioned, they can modify the landscape. But for the unfortunate animals that are caught in avalanches in the winter, and it happens, we consider one sort of iconic animal in Glacier Park, the mountain goat, right? And goats are in avalanche terrain all the time. And we had really good data from a mountain goat population actually in Southeast Alaska, and very similar terrain to Glacier National Park. And while we can't exactly say that this is what's happening in Glacier, we can make some associations. But in Southeast Alaska, we found that avalanches are the single the single cause or the single most frequent cause of mountain goat mortality in Southeast Alaska. And as you mentioned before, if goats get caught in avalanches and then they're just in the debris, and then as the predators sort of emerge, and in the late winter, spring, if it's bears, then from hibernation. But we've also seen evidence of wolverines sort of scavenging in the avalanche debris piles for any animals that are caught in those avalanches. So, yeah, they play a role in sort of regulating the wildlife cycle too.
It's our own private refrigerator.
I guess so. Yeah.
Oh, so gruesome, but
sorry.
Necessary. These are the ways of nature, right? I mean, these are natural things that occur that affect the landscape, wildlife, whole ecosystem. And it certainly occurs quite a lot in Glacier National Park. We're kind of heading up the road, popular places in Glacier, Eric. We want to hear a little bit more about, let me ask you, what's the coolest place you've ever been in the winter in Glacier, where it's taken you? I sort of stutter and hesitate because I think there's so many great places, that I could use as an example. I think, the one place that sort of is it has to be one of my favorite, and it's one place that I frequent a lot, especially in the spring during the spring opening of the Going of the Sun Road and during our forecasting operations. But it's we have a weather station that's used for forecasting, and it's actually used for other things like search and rescue and fire weather forecasting in the summer. But it's a remote station up near the garden wall. It sits at about 7,400 feet, and it's above the Highline Trail. And so when we go to maintain it in the summer, we're walking along the Highline Trail, and then we kind of head up from there. And it's just this beautiful perch. You have an amazing view of the McDonald Valley, and no one goes there. And so it's sort of this amazing little haven, but you've got great views, and it's also great for collecting data, which is why we have a weather station there.
And so I'd have to say that that's, probably one of the favorite. And there was one instance, I'll tell a quick anecdote here, but it was in 2020. And, as we all know, that it was the spring of 2020. And so there was a lot of uncertainty. But they were still opening the road. And so the road crews were working. And, obviously they needed avalanche forecasting. And at the time, I was the only one. I was the only one working at the time. And the park at that point in time happened to be closed. And this was early on. This is in early April. So I was standing at that spot that I just mentioned. We called the Garden Wall Weather Station. And, I sort of looked around. And in the million acres of Glacier Park, because it was closed, I was the only one sort of in that area. And it felt surreal. But it was, it was a pretty special moment. So I don't know. I think that's one of them, but there are dozens of others.
Sure. I should have said that specifically. One of the places. But we're going to talk a little bit more about getting up further to the Logan Pass area and the opening of the road and all those spring conditions right when we come back.
Ever notice how a good trail mix has all the right stuff? Nuts for energy, raisins for sweetness, chocolate because chocolate. At Freedom Bank, we've got the right mix too. Personalized service, smart solutions, and technology to bank from anywhere in the Flathead Valley or beyond. Proud sponsor of Hiking Fools, because life's better with good snacks and a great bank. Member FDIC.
Welcome back. We are the Hiking Fools. I've been talking with Eric Peitzsch, avalanche specialist for the USGS. A lot of work in Glacier National Park, and we've been talking about places people understand and they know and they recognize. And as we make our way up the road toward Logan Pass, we're talking about hiker-biker access in the spring. We're talking about all the conditions being updated on those, and we're talking about plowing the road and the opening of the road.
Yeah, Eric, when we all love to see the updates, the plowing of the road. Where are they at? Where are the plow crews at? And they mention all these specific names like the Big Drift and, some of the things on the west side. Maybe you can identify that a little more and just tell us, why is this such a big deal, like the Big Drift? Like, how much snow usually accumulates in that section or, some of the big pointers of the going to the Sun Road?
Yeah, that's a good point in that, there's sort of these landmarks as we go up the road, even as forecasters, it's like, and as the road crew reaches a certain point, then it sort of has this meaning of like, yes, typically it's like, now we're 3 weeks from reaching Logan Pass, sort of thing. So there are these little landmarks that we use, but as we go up from on the west side towards the pass, I think the biggest avalanche path that we run into is what we call granite. There's actually two, granite and little granite, and they're two different starting zones up by the garden wall, and then they come down and they come together, and then they eventually can reach the valley bottom. And in 2009, another huge avalanche released in those zones, and you could see it for a while, but it went all the way down to McDonald Creek, across the upper Sun Road, the lower Sun Road, and then Packer's Roost, and all the way down to the creek bed. And in fact, the avalanche debris, the snow, was so deep in the runout zone there in the valley bottom that it actually oversummered, meaning like there was snow left over the entire summer. It was insulated by a bunch of woody debris, so it stuck around. Wow. So that's sort of the first one. And then as we move up the road, we have Haystack Creek, which is kind of the first really big avalanche path that you can see from the road. The little granite ones and the granite that I just mentioned, you can't really see from the road, so it's kind of deceiving. But Haystack, you can see, it's right there. And then you move up the road even further, and you get into Big Bend, which is where the Weeping Wall is if you're driving up the road. And that has several really big starting zones that can impact the road. And 2 years ago, there was a huge avalanche that deposited a bunch of debris on the road itself. It was like 30 feet deep, and so it took the road crew a while to get through that. And then as we kind of go up the road, of course, we go through Triple Arches, and Triple Arches is sort of famous for, I think it was 2018 or 19, and then again in 21 or 22. I'm sorry that the years sort of blend together, but there were a couple of incidents where cyclists headed up the road and then an avalanche came down, and Fortunately, no one was involved, but people did get stuck on the uphill side. And because when the debris crosses the road, it's so steep in there that it sort of just keeps going, and it creates this really steep, icy slope. And they couldn't get back across because it was too icy and steep. So it required a rescue, and then the road crew came up and replowed. And then, we get up the road eventually through Rim Rock and to Logan Pass. And then on the east side is what you mentioned, the big drift. And, that's sort of iconic. It's sort of it's always deep in there just because of the way the wind moves through. The predominant winds are moving southwest over the pass. They take all that snow on the west side, not all of it, but they take a bunch of it and load it onto the east side. And it creates this, this really big drift. And it can be, up to 40 feet deep because there's a cliff there too. And so it all sort of just fills in from the road to the top of the cliff. And so it takes them a while, but it's a landmark because that's often where the east side crew and the west side crew sort of meet. They're both plowing from their respective sides, and then they meet near the big drift. And that's always a hooray moment every year when we're down to pavement, at that point.
Nice.
We always kind of wait to hear that. Oh, they got through the big drift.
You said it. Yeah. Everybody else is watching too, looking at access to the park and some of the finer points along the road. But at the time of recording of this episode, we really thank you because it is spring, it's March, and this is your busy time. And so what are you doing right now? Like, what's a typical day for you, and what types of things are you looking at and forecasting?
Right. So right now we are, we're working on the winter data collection, wrapping things up on various projects that we have there. But then we're ramping up for the spring opening season. And we'll start that, of course. They always start plowing on April 1st or near there. And so, a typical day for us forecasters means, getting up early, of course, taking the information that we have, what happened from the weather overnight and, what we saw the day before in the snowpack or any avalanche activity. And we sort of compiled all that information. We put out the daily forecast for the Park Service, and it's an internal forecast that's used by the road crew and all of the park if people are headed up the road or working or traveling on the road. And then we will head out. We meet with the road crew every morning. We brief them in person because they're the ones up there every single day. So we have a discussion with them about what they can anticipate in terms of avalanche hazard. And then we basically follow them up the road in the morning, and we'll head up, meaning like we'll put skis on, skins on, and then we'll start climbing uphill depending on where they're working. And so we try to be just in front of them to get a sense of what's happening in the avalanche paths so we can help anticipate, the hazard for their work schedule in the coming days. So we'll head up into the, near, and of course, and trying to get through the safest route into the upper elevations. And then we'll typically, we might dig a pit in the snow to see what's going on. And in the spring, we're of course concerned about weak layer development, what's happening with the snowpack structure, but mostly we're concerned about what water is doing in the snowpack. So as the snow melts and water starts moving through the snowpack, that can impact stability. So we're kind of looking to see what water's doing, how it's interacting with the snowpack structure. So we'll dig a pit, and then, we'll make an assessment. And if things are changing more rapidly than we had anticipated in the morning, then, the nice thing is that we have radio communications with the road crew so that we can let them know immediately, like, hey, things are changing more rapidly or quicker than we thought. Like, it might be time to shut down, let's say, like 11 or 12 instead of, trying to work through the afternoon. Because, if we get a refreeze overnight, that's a good thing. And then they can work in the mornings. But then as things start to destabilize, then we have to keep an eye out for things as small loose avalanches start moving. And then, of course, as the day progresses, they can get bigger. So it's it's a real-time forecast too. It's not a real-time snow safety. It's not just, the forecast that we put out in the morning. We're able to actually work very closely with them, and we're up there throughout the day. So then, we get to, then the fun part, we get to ski back down, go back to the office, compile all the data, and start over the next day.
Wow, you have to work in such ugly views.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's too bad. It's too bad. That sounds like my dad. My dad was a soil scientist for NRCS and did the same thing out in one season and in the other, to map all the soils. So
Yeah.
Okay, Eric, I have to know, there's so many trails in the park and it's hard to narrow down which is your favorite, but what do you got for us?
Yeah, you're right. There are too many. I'll just think of a recent one that I did and I ran with my son, which always makes it special. But we started in the Sun Rift Gorge area and went up to Sayi Pass and then kind of did the loop and did the out and back to Began Pass too, and then came down the trail back to the road and the Pagan Pass Trail, and then kind of just looped our way back to the car. So that's a really fun one. It's it's long, but it's gorgeous. You get into the Alpine, you can see glaciers. You go through the burn if you start in the Sun Rift Gorge side. So it's really, really cool.
Yeah, that's such a great trail. We love that one as well.
Yeah, a little bit of everything Glacier has to offer. And check out some of other episodes that we've done. Avalanche Lake, of course, we detail. Sayi Pass Trail is another one, and a little bit of basic climbing in Glacier, and you want to be conscious of this. Eric, final thing, we just thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and being with us here. And last, just the final resources, what people can do, where they can go to figure out how to be safe.
Yeah, so in the winter, of course, get educated, and Flathead Avalanche Center offers numerous avalanche classes. But of course, check the Avalanche Center advisory every day. Even if you're not headed out, it's still a good thing to check just so you have an idea of what's going on. And then they also have, you can look on their website at flatheadavalanche.org, or you can get the Avi app, and you can choose Flathead Avalanche as your primary source there. And then you can look on the Avi app and you can see the forecasts, the observations, and all of the weather data too. And so even on their website, you can see all of the weather data that they from around the region, and that's another great resource too. And then if it's the spring and you're recreating along the Going to the Sun Road, just check the park website to see where the closures are. We provide recommendations to the rangers so that they can put in proper closures for various reasons. But for avalanches, we provide some recommendations to them as well. So just check the park website to see where things are. But yeah, have a great and safe time this spring up there as well.
Awesome. What a pleasure. We appreciate having you. And check out our Instagram page at Hiking Fools MT to see some great photos from our recent adventures. And tune in next time. Check out more episodes online, including part 1 of this show. And remember to follow us on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. I'm Josh.
And I'm Sarah.
And we are the Hiking Fools, encouraging you to always go